My son invited me to celebrate Thanksgiving, but what I found inside his home broke my heart. The call came on a Wednesday afternoon, a day like any other, but it felt different the moment I heard Michael's voice. My son, my only child, hadn't been in touch much lately. Our calls had become less frequent, and when we did talk, it was often brief and impersonal. I could feel the distance growing between us, but I never expected it to come to this. "Hey, Mom," Michael said, his voice sounding a little strained but still familiar. "I've been thinking, I want to invite you over for Thanksgiving this year. It's been too long since we've all celebrated together." Thanksgiving? I hadn't expected that. The last few years, we had barely seen each other during the holidays. Work, life, so many things had pulled us apart. Michael had moved into a new house with his wife, and they had settled into a life that seemed to push me further away. I often wondered if they were too busy or if they simply didn't want to make time for me. But now, out of nowhere, he was inviting me to celebrate Thanksgiving with them. I felt a flicker of hope in my chest. Maybe this was the beginning of something. Maybe this was Michael's way of mending our fractured relationship. I held my breath for a moment before responding, not wanting to sound too eager, but I couldn't help myself. "I'd love to come, sweetheart. I'll bring your favorite apple pie. You know, the one I make with the cinnamon and nutmeg topping." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and I almost thought he was going to say something else. But then he replied, "That sounds great, Mom. You don't need to bring anything else. Just come, relax, enjoy the day with us. I'll do all the cooking." The offer was generous, and the way he said it made it sound like he was trying to make up for something, maybe, for the space that had grown between us over the years. Maybe he was trying to show me that he wanted things to be different. But there was something in his tone, something I couldn't quite place, that made me hesitate. It was almost like a polite formality, like he was going through the motions of being a good son rather than genuinely excited to see me. Still, I brushed away the nagging doubts. I told myself that maybe I was just overthinking it. After all, he was my son, and no matter what had happened between us, Thanksgiving could be the time to reconnect, to rebuild the bond we once had. "I'll be there," I said, my voice filled with quiet anticipation. "I'll see you then, Michael." As I hung up the phone, I couldn't help but smile, though the smile was bittersweet. I had missed him. I had missed being part of his life. There were days when the silence between us felt deafening, but today, just today, it felt like maybe, just maybe, things could get better. The days leading up to Thanksgiving felt like an eternity. I found myself anxiously preparing for the dinner, even though Michael had told me not to bring anything other than the pie. I spent hours making sure the crust was perfect, and the apples were just the right sweetness. I remembered how much he loved that pie when he was younger, how we would share it after dinner and laugh over the silly little things in life. The memory of those moments, so simple and full of love, kept me going as I worked in the kitchen. As the morning of Thanksgiving arrived, I found myself feeling a strange mix of emotions. I couldn't shake the feeling that things weren't quite right. I couldn't remember the last time we had been together like this, laughing, sharing stories around the table. It felt like years since Michael and I had shared those quiet, intimate moments, and I feared that maybe they were gone for good. Still, I pushed those thoughts aside and focused on the hope that today would be different. That today, Michael and I would reconnect. That the Thanksgiving dinner would be the beginning of something new. When I arrived at his house later that afternoon, I took a deep breath before stepping out of the car. I could hear the hum of conversation and the clinking of dishes from inside, and I felt a wave of warmth flood over me. The house looked cozy, even festive. Michael had clearly put effort into making it special. There were pumpkins and candles on the porch, the kind of details that showed someone cared about the holiday, about family. I took the apple pie in my hands and walked up to the door, my heart beating just a little faster now. I knocked, and within moments, Michael opened the door. He was smiling, but there was something off about it, a kind of forced smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Hey, Mum," he said, stepping aside to let me in. "Glad you could make it. I've been cooking all day, so I hope you're hungry." I smiled, though there was a slight tremor in my voice. "I'm starving, actually. It all smells wonderful." He nodded, still holding the door open as I stepped inside. But as I entered the house, something felt strange. The atmosphere was different from what I had expected. The warmth, the chatter, the bustle of family life. None of it was there. The place was quiet, almost too quiet. The usual hum of activity that I had always associated with family gatherings was replaced by an eerie stillness. The first thing I noticed was the lack of decoration. The house didn't feel festive at all. There were no pictures on the walls, no family photos or memories displayed anywhere. Instead, the walls were bare, almost clinical in their simplicity. The living room, which had once been a place for laughter and games and conversation, was now just a space filled with sparse furniture couches that didn't look comfortable, and a TV screen that was playing a football game, but no one was watching. Michael, noticing my confusion, quickly tried to cover it up with a small chuckle. "Daphne's really into minimalism, you know," he said, a little too casually. "She likes to keep things simple. Less clutter." I nodded, though I couldn't shake the discomfort in my chest. It didn't feel like Michael's house anymore. It didn't feel like home. I glanced around, searching for some sign of familiarity. But it wasn't there. There were no traces of our past, no signs of the family I had raised. It felt like a stranger's home, not the place where my son had grown up. "Where's Daphne?" I asked, trying to steer the conversation towards something more familiar. "She's in the kitchen," Michael replied, still acting strangely distant. "She's putting the final touches on dinner." "Let me take your coat." I handed him my coat, trying to ignore the tightness in my chest as I followed him down the hallway. The smell of roasting turkey wafted through the air, and I tried to push aside the unease that was creeping over me. This was supposed to be a celebration, a time for family, for reconnecting. But the more I looked around, the more I realized that something was terribly wrong. When we reached the kitchen, Daphne was standing at the stove, stirring something in a large pot. She looked up when we entered, offering me a tight, forced smile. "Hi, Sophia," she said, her voice polite, but distant. "Glad you could make it." "Of course," I replied, though it felt like a hollow answer. "Everything smells wonderful." "Thank you," Daphne replied, but there was an odd tension in her voice. "I hope you're hungry." I nodded, though I couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that something wasn't right. Something had shifted between Michael and me, between all of us, and it was more than just the way the house looked or the lack of warmth in the room. It was something deeper, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. As Michael set the table, I tried to strike up small talk, asking about the kids or his work, but it was clear that he wasn't fully engaged. He kept glancing at Daphne, and whenever our eyes met, there was a flicker of something unspoken, something that made me feel like an outsider in my own son's life. But it wasn't until dinner that everything finally fell apart. As we sat down at the table, I looked around at the empty chairs. The kids, as Michael had said, were in their rooms, and the air was thick with tension. It wasn't just about the empty seats. It was the absence of the closeness, the warmth, the bond we used to share. Everything that Thanksgiving was supposed to represent had been replaced with awkward silences and forced smiles. And that's when I realized Michael had invited me not to reconnect, but to show me something I wasn't prepared to see. This Thanksgiving wasn't about family. It was about a broken connection, a broken trust, and a home that no longer felt like home. As we sat down at the dinner table, I couldn't help but feel out of place. The beautiful Thanksgiving spread Daphne had prepared was before us. Perfectly roasted turkey, mashed potatoes, stuffing, and a variety of side dishes that looked mouth-watering. But as I looked around the table, my heart sank. The atmosphere was nothing like the festive, lively dinners we used to have when Michael was young. No laughter, no lively conversation, no warmth of family. Just the clink of silverware and the awkward silence between us all. I tried to focus on the food, to remind myself that this was a meal to celebrate, to be thankful for. But every bite felt like an effort, as though I were chewing through a thick fog of discomfort. Michael, seated across from me, didn't seem to notice. He was eating with a distracted air, barely lifting his gaze from his plate. Daphne, on the other hand, sat with her back straight, her eyes occasionally glancing at me, but never quite meeting mine for more than a second. The silence was unbearable. "So, how's work, Michael?" I asked, trying to break the stillness, desperate to steer the conversation back to something familiar. Michael glanced up briefly, but there was no enthusiasm in his response. "Same as usual. Busy. You know how it is," he said, stabbing his fork into his food absent-mindedly. He didn't elaborate, didn't ask about my life, didn't seem interested in anything beyond the confines of his plate. I looked at him, trying to gauge his mood, but his face was unreadable. The son I once knew, the one who would excitedly tell me about his projects or the books he was reading, was gone. In his place sat a man who barely seemed present, as if his mind was somewhere else entirely. Daphne caught my eye briefly and forced a smile. "It's been a little hectic for all of us," she said, her tone polite but not warm. "But you know, we manage. We're always managing." I nodded, not sure how to respond. Daphne's words were clipped, almost as if she was trying to keep things distant. I couldn't help but feel like I was intruding on something I didn't understand. This wasn't the family I had imagined walking into when Michael had invited me just then. Michael cleared his throat, the sound cutting through. The quiet, but his voice was still distant. "There's something I need to tell you, Mom." My heart skipped a beat. The weight of his words hung in the air like a heavy curtain. My stomach twisted with a mix of hope and fear. Was this the moment he was going to explain why everything felt so off? Was he finally going to open up about the distance that had grown between us? I've been meaning to talk to you about something for a while now," Michael continued, his eyes darting between Daphne and me. It's been hard to find the right time." I leaned forward slightly, my heart racing. "What is it, Michael?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, but the worry in my chest made it shake for the first time that evening. Michael set his fork down, his hands clasped together on the table. His face grew serious, almost somber. The shift in his demeanor was unmistakable. Something had happened. Something he had been hiding from me for a long time. "Mom, I need to apologize for a lot of things. For the way I've treated you, for the way I've been distant." His voice faltered, but he pressed on. "You don't deserve any of it. But I guess I just didn't know how to handle everything that's been going on, and I didn't want you to find out." "Find out what, Michael?" My voice was barely a whisper, the words leaving my lips like an accusation. "What have you been hiding from me?" Daphne's expression shifted, her eyes narrowing just slightly, but she didn't speak. I noticed that she was clutching her napkin tightly in her hands, a subtle indication of discomfort. Something was wrong, and I could feel the tension in the air thickening. I looked from Michael to Daphne, trying to understand what was happening, but neither of them seemed willing to break the silence. Michael took a deep breath before speaking again. It's about the money and everything else. I froze, my mind scrambling to make sense of his words. Money? What did money have to do with anything? And what else had he been hiding? Michael, what are you talking about? I asked, my voice trembling now, the fear settling deep in my chest. What do you mean by everything else? He hesitated again, his eyes downcast before he finally spoke the words that shattered everything. I've been taking money from your accounts, Mom, for months now. A little here and there. I didn't want to tell you because I knew you'd be disappointed. I didn't want you to know that I've been struggling ... But the truth is, I've been drowning in debt. My breath caught in my throat. My mind went blank for a moment. What? I whispered, the shock and disbelief making my heart beat painfully in my chest. You've been ... taking money from me? Michael nodded, his face filled with guilt. I didn't know how else to get by. The bills piled up, and I couldn't tell you. I didn't want to burden you, but I couldn't make it on my own. Not without help. I sat there, unable to move or speak for what felt like an eternity. The room felt like it was closing in on me. My own son, the one I had spent my life providing for, the one I had trusted with everything, had been secretly taking from me. The weight of it all felt unbearable, and I didn't know how to process the flood of emotions that overwhelmed me. Why didn't you tell me? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Why didn't you come to me for help? I would have done anything. I would have helped you, Michael. He looked up at me then, his eyes filled with shame. I didn't want you to think less of me. I didn't want you to see me as a failure. But now ... now, I realize I've made everything worse. I felt the tears well up in my eyes, but I blinked them away, not wanting to show how deeply his betrayal had cut me. How could you do this to me? How could you steal from me, Michael? Daphne remained silent, her face tense, her eyes darting between Michael and me. I wasn't sure if she was ashamed or indifferent, but her silence spoke volumes. I turned to her, needing to understand what role she played in all of this. Daphne, did you know about this? I asked, my voice shaking with emotion. She finally met my gaze, but there was no warmth in her eyes, no hint of apology. I knew, she said, her voice quiet but firm. Michael's been struggling for a long time. We've both been trying to make it work, but it hasn't been easy. I shook my head in disbelief. You both ... you both knew, and no one told me. Not once did you come to me and say, Sophia, we need help. We're in trouble. Michael's face softened, his guilt evident. I know, Mom, I'm sorry. I should have been honest with you. But I was ashamed, and I didn't want to disappoint you. I sat there, stunned, my mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. The hurt was too much to bear. My own son had taken from me, hidden his struggles, and now he was sitting here, apologizing as if that could undo everything. And the hardest part was realizing that Daphne had been complicit in all of this. She had known, and yet they both chose to keep me in the dark. I don't know what to say, I finally whispered. I don't know how to process this, Michael. There was a long, painful silence before Michael spoke again. I know I've ruined everything, Mum, but I want to make it right. I want to rebuild our relationship. I want to be the son you deserve, but I wasn't sure anymore. Could I ever trust him again? Could I ever look at him the same way? The pain of betrayal, the weight of what he had done, it was too much to just forgive and forget. I looked down at my hands. my mind swirling with emotions too complicated to untangle. What I had thought was a simple Thanksgiving dinner had turned into a painful revelation that would change everything. And as I looked across the table at my son, I realized that nothing would ever be the same again. The silence at the table was suffocating, the words Michael had just spoken hanging in the air like an insurmountable wall between us. I tried to absorb what I had just learned, but it felt like the floor beneath me had dropped away. My son, the child I had raised with all my heart, had betrayed me. The trust I had placed in him, the love I had poured into him, was shattered. The weight of it pressed down on me so heavily that I could barely breathe. I didn't know what to say. I wanted to scream, to demand an explanation, to ask him how he could do this to me, to us. But I couldn't find the words. Instead, I sat there, paralyzed, my heart in my throat. Michael, sensing my shock, looked as though he were about to speak again, but I raised my hand, stopping him. I needed a moment, just a moment, to collect myself. I looked down at the table, focusing on the half-eaten food in front of me, unable to bring myself to eat another bite. The turkey, the mashed potatoes, the stuffing, all of it seemed to lose its meaning. This wasn't a Thanksgiving dinner. It was a reminder of everything that had gone wrong in our relationship. Finally, I spoke, my voice shaking with emotion. "How could you do this, Michael? How could you steal from me? Your own mother?" Michael's face turned pale, his eyes filled with regret. "I never wanted to hurt you, Mom. I didn't know what else to do. I felt trapped. I couldn't keep up with the bills, the expenses. And I didn't want to tell you because I thought you'd be disappointed. I thought you'd look at me differently." "You are my son, Michael," I said, my voice rising with the intensity of the pain I was feeling. "I would have helped you. I always would have helped you. But you chose to lie to me. You chose to hide it from me. And you took what was mine without asking, without a second thought." "I know," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I made a huge mistake. And I'm so sorry, Mom. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't deserve your forgiveness. I just ... I wanted to fix it, but I didn't know how." I shook my head, tears starting to sting my eyes. "You think saying sorry is enough? You think that's going to make everything go back to normal?" My voice cracked as I spoke. "You've broken my trust, Michael, and I don't know if I can ever get it back." At that moment, Daphne, who had been silent throughout the entire conversation, finally spoke. Her voice was quiet but firm. "Sophia, I know you're angry, and you have every right to be. But Michael's been carrying this weight for so long, and he didn't know who else to turn to." I turned to her, my gaze sharp. "And you, Daphne? You knew about this. You were complicit in it, weren't you? You stood by and let him do this. How could you just let him?" Daphne flinched at my words, but she didn't back down. "I didn't want him to feel like a failure. I didn't want to make things worse. I was trying to help him, but I didn't know what to do either. We were both struggling, and it just kept getting worse." I stood up abruptly, unable to sit there any longer. The walls of the room seemed to close in on me, and I needed to get out, to breathe, to clear my head. "I can't do this," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I need to go." Before either of them could say anything, I grabbed my purse and turned to leave. My mind was spinning with anger, confusion, and betrayal. I felt as though the ground beneath me had shifted, leaving me unsteady and lost. How could Michael, my own flesh and blood, betray me like this? And how could Daphne, his wife, stand by and let it happen? As I reached the door, Michael's voice called out to me, a pleading note in it. "Mom, please, don't leave. We can talk about this." We can fix it. But I didn't stop. I didn't want to hear more excuses. I didn't want to hear anything else from him. I couldn't bear it. I walked out of the door, my heart heavy with pain, my mind reeling from the revelations of the evening. The drive home was a blur. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly as I fought back tears. I didn't know where to go, what to think, or how to process everything. How had things gone so wrong? I kept asking myself that over and over. How had my relationship with Michael, the relationship I had worked so hard to nurture, come to this? When I finally arrived home, I sat in the car for a long time, staring at the house. It was quiet, peaceful, a stark contrast to the storm that had just passed through my life. I didn't know what I was supposed to do now. What was I supposed to say to Michael? How could I ever trust him again after what he had done? Eventually, I went inside, but everything felt different. The house, which had once been filled with laughter and love, now felt empty. I went to the kitchen, my movements robotic, my mind still clouded with the events of the evening. I tried to make myself a cup of tea, but my hands trembled so much that I had to set the cup down. The phone rang, breaking the silence, and I instinctively knew it was Michael. I didn't answer. I couldn't. I wasn't ready to hear his voice, to hear any more of his apologies or excuses. I needed space. I needed time to process what had happened. I tried to distract myself. I turned on the television, but I couldn't concentrate on anything. Every part of me was consumed by the betrayal, by the shock of what Michael had done. I couldn't stop thinking about the man who had sat across the table from me that evening, who had stolen from me, hidden his struggles, and pushed me away when I would have given anything to help him. It wasn't just the money. It was the lies. It was the distance. It was the fact that my son, the one I had trusted more than anyone else, had chosen to hurt me. And worse, he had done it out of fear of disappointing me, out of shame. It wasn't just the betrayal, it was the fact that he had seen me as someone to hide from, not someone to turn to. Hours passed, but the questions in my mind never stopped. Could I ever forgive him? Could I ever trust him again after everything he had done? I didn't know. I didn't have the answers. All I knew was that the road ahead would be long, and the healing would be slow. Trust wasn't something that could be repaired overnight. The pain would fade, but it would never go away completely. Michael had broken something deep inside of me, something that I didn't know if I could ever fully restore. But one thing was certain. The love I had for him had not disappeared. It was buried deep under the anger, the hurt, and the betrayal. But it was still there. I wasn't ready to forgive him yet. But I knew that, somehow, in time, I would have to decide what kind of relationship I wanted with him going forward. As the night wore on, I felt exhaustion take over. My thoughts slowed, my body finally giving into the weight of the emotions I had carried all day. But even as I closed my eyes and tried to sleep, I knew this wasn't over. The journey to healing, to understanding, to forgiveness would take time. And I didn't know where it would lead, but I knew that it was only the beginning.